Welcome to another episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Our hosts, Sri Rajgopalan, Peter V.S. Bond, and Brian Gildenberg explore how brands and retailers engage consumers in an increasingly digitally driven world. And now, here are the CPG Guys. Hello and welcome to the CPG Guys podcast. I'm PVSB, your mostly incorrigible co-host. Usually I am joined by my BFF and my brother. He's a formidable thought leader in the world of omnichannel consumer engagement. He's also patriarch of the Raj family entertainment empire. And he's got another gig. He's now the chief revenue officer at Think Blue. Of course, I'm referring to the man known as Sri. He's unavailable today, traveling in Chicago. So in his place, I have joining me a familiar voice to listeners of this podcast. She's co-hosted another episode previous to this one. She's also guest hosted a couple of spots on the Fresh Four. Of course, I'm talking about my ride or die sidekick, my number one in my day job at Flywheel. Please welcome to the anchor chair yet again, Jacqui Dynowski. Jacqui, how are you? What's going on? It makes you something. We'll have to figure out what that is. I've got a couple of choice descriptions for you on occasion.
It's a family show, Peter.
Hey, you and I were together in Japan a couple of weeks ago. That was a lot of fun, wasn't it? I mean, wow, what an experience!
It is honestly bucket list, absolute bucket list destination.
I don't think I really had a concept of how big a city it was until I got there, because I'm looking at a map and I'm framing my mind kind of like Manhattan. I'm like, oh, okay, well, you can walk this city. And then if you ask Google to overlay a map of Manhattan on Tokyo, you realize how small New York City is. And you go, I can't walk this city.
It's crazy.
And then, I gave up trying to understand the train system. You did a much better job than I did. I ended up taking a lot of Ubers around the city. Not surprising.
Oh,
right?
I mean, you know how it is.
But it was a lot of fun.
I spend a couple of days in a city and I assimilate. I become one with the city, Peter.
You're a regular Borg, as they would say in Star Trek. Cultural reference there. No, but I already did that once. I called you my number one. So you're my number. You're the Jonathan Riker to my Jean-Luc Picard. Yes, people. I compared myself to the great Patrick Stewart, Sir Patrick Stewart, and I've got more hair than he does.
A whole lot more.
And I'm a little bit taller. You're not
a baller,
but yeah, and you're not quite as tall as Jonathan Frakes, who plays Will Riker. I think we've got our height balances off in that regard.
I'm literally a foot shorter than you are,
but only in physical stature. In chutzpah, oh, you've got me by a foot and a half, Jax. Thanks for joining me on today's episode. It's going to be a good conversation. There's a particularly poignant reason why I have you as a co-host today, which will become very evident in a moment. Before we get to our guest, we want to request all of our loyal listeners using Apple or Spotify in particular as your preferred podcast listening platform, please give us a rating. Go into the app, scroll down to where they have the star rating. You can choose any number you want. Jacqui's favorite number is 5. She'll tell you that, but you choose what you want. But give us a rating because you know what it does? It feeds an algorithm that helps make our podcast more findable by retail and CPG industry professionals, much like yourselves, who want to be educated and entertained. And while you're at it, why don't you leave a review? Actually, tell us what you think, what you like, what you don't like. Please do give us some of your feedback. We want to fine tune this podcast to be reflective of the interests of our audience. We'll also encourage you to check out our sister podcast, the FMCG Guys. Our dear friend Daniel Torres Dwyer leads the charge there out of Barcelona and covers the European market from a fast-moving consumer goods perspective. And of course, our dear friends Reese and Jennifer back stateside who run the CPG Scoop podcast. Both of these are going to be great. We don't pretend to want to be the only podcast you consume. We're kind of like craft beer. We're looking for a share of stomach, but we know you're going to want to try lots of different beers because it's going to make you more educated. So please do check us out. We're probably going to add a couple more podcasts to our collective by the end of the year, so stay tuned. There are so many great ones, and if you go to our LinkedIn page, we usually publish every couple of months a list of the favorite podcasts that we like to listen to when we're not listening to ourselves drone on. I'll also mention the CPG Guys are going to be kicking off the upcoming CGT Consumer Goods Sales and Marketing Summit in Princeton, New Jersey, September 23rd to the 25th, with a State of the Industry fireside chat. The event has a full schedule of events with numerous industry luminaries. We've got some previous podcast guests like Sarabi Pokriel from Church and Dwight, and all sorts of other great people, Colgate-Palmolive's Vivek Rastogi, and of course, Shree's sister-in-law, Sonia Sethi from Coca-Cola. Links to the summit registration page, our podcast collective, and the entire Raj family social media platform, which takes up literally half of our digital liner notes. They're all available there in the digital liner notes of this podcast episode. So please check them out. So let's get on with today's conversation. Up until the 1950s, the retail landscape was highly fragmented. It was the golden age for brands to drive sales and profit through scale. But as retail started to consolidate across a smaller number of national retailers, the balance of power began to shift as they ultimately controlled large sums of points of distribution for brands looking to sell their products. So for the ensuing 60 to 70 years, right, winning with retailers became a bit of a longitudinal game of trade terms, slotting fees that ultimately benefited the retailers as the retailers got to be bigger and more powerful. But the introduction of online marketplaces into the retail ecosystem, powered by retail media, presents a fundamental opportunity for the balance of power to shift back in the other direction. Here to talk about a new white paper he co-authored with his Flywheel colleague, Katie Box, entitled The Big Shift, How Brands Tip the Retail Power Balance, is the co-founder of Flywheel, a division of Omnicom. Please join me in welcoming to the podcast, Patrick Miller. Patrick, welcome. How you doing?
Looking forward to the conversation.
So are we. We're very excited about this. You and I recently did a webinar together with a couple of industry luminaries. And I thought bringing this into the podcast and opening this topic up to a broader audience would be pretty terrific. So, Patrick, before we get to the questions, I know you recently started focusing on a number of strategic initiatives versus your previous operational role. What are you kind of working on these days?
So, for me, like figuring out sort of how do we connect, upper funnel to lower funnel is a monstrous one, challenging one, but a fun one. And then sort of a thread of that is bridging, determinism, and quite frankly, defining what determinism is, because there's lots of smushing of data, to probabilism. I think some people see this as sort of a religious exercise. And to me, it's not, it's an and statement, not an or. And so, figuring out where is that point of demarcation and how brands should look at the various tools in the shed to ultimately sort of, grow their businesses, both online and off. So, that and nerding out with the data science colleagues and digging into AMC and log files and all that sort of fun stuff.
That's a pretty good gig. Well, what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to steal my my colleague Emma Irwin's style and ask you what's the last thing you bought on Amazon, but because I'm sure it's always good. But I'm sure you're already thinking about the October deal days and what you're going to get.
I know. Actually, it was we're heading down to beautiful Ocean City, Maryland tomorrow, and so I bought like a couple buckets and shovels for our 3 and our 4-year-old. So it's supposed to arrive this afternoon.
I love it. That sounds like a good thing. Well, we're going to include in the digital liner notes of this episode links to Patrick's LinkedIn profile and a link to where our audience can find the new Big Shift white paper that you co-authored with your Flywheel colleague, Katie Box. So let's get to the questions. I'm going to kick it off and Jacqui will follow, but let me start with this higher level question. We look back at the prior century. In the first half, brands played a very dominant role. Often people refer to it as the golden age of the brand. Really, what changed in terms of the retail landscape and how did brands respond to this change relative to how they were able to
Sure. So
operate?
the biggie is just the nationalization, of retail, and whether it's A&P, whether it's Sears, whether it's Kmart, whether it's Walmart, and as the retailers became less fragmented, and and instead of it sort of brands relying on regional brokers to lead negotiations, around trade terms, they all of a sudden there became central offices and home offices, and and retailers were able to negotiate on more of a peer-to-peer basis, and claw back some of that power. And so as they were able to consolidate buying power, they were able to then extract additional concessions from brands, because of sort of as if you look at like Walmart with more than 20% share of grocery, that's a lot of buying power, and then that's very different than where things were pre A&P, and so that I think that's been really the big shift historically over the last 100 years or so.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned A&P. At its height, A&P had over 5,000 stores across the country. In fact, if you drive through parts of the Northeast, you will often see what are probably repurposed Rite Aids and other types of Dollar Generals, but you can tell based on the weather vane on top that it was once an A&P store. Grand Union, a retailer out of New Jersey that had 2,000 stores. That's two major retailers that no longer exist. Everybody thinks about the size of Walmart and Kroger these days, but those were two very big retailers. And, they played a significant role from the 1950s on in terms of those points of distribution.
Well, Patrick, I have a question around the digital shelf and online marketplaces. What makes them different from the physical world, and what power do brands have in this channel when you consider that average regional grocery stores have about 30,000 SKUs and Walmart with 120 and so on? What are your thoughts around that?
Sure. So you think about the traditional, sort of, job of a sales executive, the biggie is selling in to a retailer. And why do they have to sell in? Well, because they're constrained by physicality. A convenience store has 3,000 SKUs, a regional grocery store has 30,000, a supercenter has 120,000. Walmart.com and Amazon.com have 500 million. And so the answer is yes, you don't have to sell in. And so it's actually the inverted problem. What do you not sell in? And to whom do you sell, and how do various classes of trade intersect with one another? And sort of knowing that pricing is at the sole discretion of the retailer, what are the second order effects of distribution decisions? And how does that then cascade across the various classes of trade? So for brands, it's they'll take your items, and they'll list them, but should you list them? And that's a much more interesting question. And so to me, sort of, as brands think through this, they have their ability to be restrained in how they and choiceful around selection, is ultimately a leverage point for them in dealing with various retailers, whether that's brick and mortar, or marketplaces.
Patrick, so one of the big changes taking place in the world of retail is this concept of retailers not just being retailers, but also being publishers. It's the advent of what has come to be known as retail media. And I think at the last estimate from eMarketer, 2023 was about $51 billion of retail media spend in the United States alone, more than double that globally. So I guess I'm kind of answering the question, but I think it's a little bit more than that. What is so appealing about retail media to retailers as a new channel for generating?
So from the retailer perspectives, the pot of gold of high gross margin businesses is amazing. They love the idea of it. And quite frankly, I hate the term retail media because it obfuscates what I think is actually most important, which is closed loop. And so I don't really care if a retailer is selling, a banner ad and it can't tie it back to an actual customer and actual conversion. Whoop-dee, doesn't matter. So I like pushing the industry of hey, the bar is actually, a true, closed loop, and ideally it's a deterministic closed loop. But then, okay, let's talk about the margin structure for a second. One, I think retailers are, sort of out there, thinking that all of these dollars are incremental. They're not. and some of them are, but not all of them. And so if they are shifting from, in store, to online, where are they coming from? Where are they going to? And then what's the variance in the margin structure? And if it was an end cap, that's high gross margin. If it's going through a partner, via DSP, well, the take rate of the trade desk is about 19 points. So that's actually dilutive. And so I think for brands, understanding, what are these retailers' motivations? Where are they? Where is this shift accretive? Where is it dilutive? Is really, really key to, saving them, from themselves, quite frankly. And then additionally sort of looking at sort of like, how does, is it brand? Is it trade? Is it braid? I think it's kind of braid. It's a little bit of both. And it opens up some interesting conversations around, well, NBA last year was obviously a brand dollar. If Amazon is advertising on the NBA and they're broadcasting it, is it now a trade dollar? I don't think so. But does that then bump into Robinson Patman? Maybe. Going to find out depending on sort of what happens with the next administration.
Do you think, to follow up on that, do you think that this is going to necessitate a revision of federal trade laws like Robinson Patman if we see this blending? Is it something that future Congresses in the near future?
I think if we look at this administration thus far, they have been, sort of, taken on big tech using sort of, all the tools in the shed. And so I would be personally, surprised, if there's not, at least some scrutiny here, and knowing that we have, the first open, inquiry, RPA inquiry in 20 some years right now. So, I think for brands, sort of recognizing that, hey, this is potential. How does it shake out? I don't know. I only play a lawyer at work, but it's important to make sure that the constructs, are in place, so that brands are making sure that sort of how their dollars are allocated, is absolutely following existing law and precedent.
Following on from that, Patrick, where you're talking about brands needing to understand how the dollars are spent, retailers expect that retail media delivers revenue, profit growth to them, and it attracts net new. What do the brands need in exchange for these new dollars to begin flowing at scale?
Sure. So I think I want to sort of separate, it from, sort of historic trade or shopper marketing, and then focus on pure sort of brand dollars. And so if I'm investing pure brand dollars, it's sort of, well, what am I getting out of my existing investment, in other platforms, whether it's Meta, whether it's Google, whether it's NBC, whether it's Peacock, who knows? How do I measure, efficacy? And then how do I then compare that on an apples to apples basis of what these various retailers are offering? And then how do I create a construct so that every retailer who is offering something similar can be measured against one another so that those dollars can be deployed in a fair and equitable, or at least a fair and justifiable way? So to me, the competition is not necessarily, what is Kroger doing versus what is, Walmart doing. It is, okay, well, what is Walmart doing versus what is Peacock doing? And if Walmart is creating more value, has more reach, has better measurement, has better scale, well, yeah, they should get the brand dollars. But so it's a little bit less of retailers competing against one another and a little bit more of the retailers competing against the incumbents, and how do they show brands that they can create more value, and they can get better reach and better measurement than they can through traditional publishers.
Yeah, I think the reach aspect of it is critically important, and that's why you and I have talked about this before. It's more likely that a lot of these retailers are going to need to come together rather than try to compete in order to deliver the scale that brands are looking for to reach an audience and make them aware.
I totally agree. And I think that's where, sort of third parties like, Criteo and the Trade Desk are absolutely key. Walmart can do it themselves. Amazon can do it themselves. But even Walmart's partnering with the Trade Desk. But, sort of everybody else, I believe, it's sort of, they're going to have to collaborate in one way or another.
I want to remind our audience that Jacqui and I are speaking today with Patrick Miller. He's the co-founder of Flywheel. Patrick, you often use words like you did at the beginning of our conversation, closed loop, determinism, probabilism, when talking about media across these retailers. What does this mean for brands in the context of their media spend, and specifically, why should they be really thinking about deterministic measurement as the core KPI?
Yeah, so I see determinism is it's the foundation that bridges to probabilism. And so it is, and I think the, brands, need to understand sort of where is the identifier, how is it constructed, purposely using the passive voice because they don't get to, and then how do they sort of prove that it does, tie back to a human or a household. And so the more granular they can be, and then sort of understanding it, they don't need to touch the PII, like let the retailers deal with that problem, but understand sort of any assumptions that are being made. If they're using a third party, identity graph, okay, what assumptions are being made? Anybody who's in the business of matching, they want a higher match rate. So what assumptions are being made? And so getting as granular as possible. Like if you're looking at AMC, like when's it a CID? When is it a null value? Why is it different? What happens with attributed sales if it is a null value? Those sorts of questions are key. And then you can start to bridge up to sort of, those the probabilistic or modeled outcomes, and it will happen. Like there is no future where it is pure determinism, because it as you get bigger, as you sell across multiple retailers and you advertise in multiple formats, like there is no way to do it on a pure one-to-one basis. That's a fairy tale. So the outcome is ultimately some of determinism, some of probabilism, and the more that brands understand any assumptions that go in, the better off they will be.
Thank you. To move slightly to a slight tangent, we have domestic retailers that are feeling a lot of pressure from new competitive sources like Chinese marketplaces. Why and how are they responding? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let's talk about why they are, why are they taking off? And so like, remember 10 years ago, I don't know, 13 years ago, whatever, I'll age myself, before I had gray hair, all the retailers would go out and they would say, Amazon has this huge sales tax advantage because they're not paying sales tax. And, and Amazonians like couldn't turn on their phones when they had like a layover in Chicago. So because they didn't want to start paying, sales tax, et cetera. That's like a quarter to a fifth of the advantage that the de minimis provision, gives the Chinese, commerce sites when they're shipping directly to consumers. So like 4 to 5 times the advantage that Amazon had, and everybody was squawking about that. And so, so it's like, I just can't imagine it's probably going to be the EU leading, to sort of close down that loophole. But I would be shocked if the States, does not. And so but then in the meantime, what do folks do? And so we've seen, sort of lowering of seller fees, in categories that tend to be, sort of a, more likely. I mean, like I buy stuff from Temu, like my toddler loves his dinosaur, fractal t-shirts. And I'm like, I can't believe it. Like it's going like 6 months on and still going strong. And it was actually a pretty good experience, in getting it. And guess what? I don't need a toddler dinosaur t-shirt to show up in 2 hours. And so I don't mind waiting. And actually, and this is the same thing that we see with Amazon in latest earnings. They're realizing that I need cough syrup right now, but the toddler t-shirt can wait a week. And so they're increasingly sort of creating a better experience, i.e., fewer boxes, by combining things together and having sort of slower ship speeds. And so they're taking what and Temu's doing the same thing, where what was a feature or what they thought was a bug, which was slow ship speed, is actually a feature. And, so I think, we're going to have like this future where, down to a sort of a SKU level, we're going to think through sort of what is the urgency? Is it worth the extra cardboard? And then do I actually read it right now? And is there potentially savings by waiting?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I am a huge shopper of Chinese marketplaces, Shein in particular. I love buying my daughter fashion from there. It's incredibly colorful and creative, and it's very affordable. And you're right. I don't care that it doesn't get there 2, 3, 4, 5 days. I don't need it that urgently. And when I see the prices I'm paying, I'm happy to justify the week or so that it takes for that product to get to me. But it's a pretty good deal. It's pretty clear that brands now have some power because they are economic buyers of retail media, something that retailers are trying to sell because it's a much, to your point earlier, it's a much higher margin. What is the power specifically that brands have, and how can they leverage that in the era of marketplaces to realign, not necessarily shift the balance of power back to where it completely favored the brands pre-1950, but how can they even this out in this day and age? And how should retailers be looking to work with brands in the era of retail media?
So look, I see it as an exercise in joint value creation, and so it's like, to me, it's like there's not a winner, there's not a loser. Like it's how do folks create value together? And so for brands, like there's two interesting vectors. One sort of selection, and we talked about that a little bit before. But then two, also sort of data and insights. And so large consumer brands typically do not have large D2C. They don't have direct relationships with the consumer. And as much as I love my paper towels, I don't want my paper towel company texting me. I don't want them emailing me. I just want the paper towels to work. And so, it's sort of like, whereas like retail, like, yeah, I love my relationship with my various retailers and how I shop them and how I interact with them. And so if brands can look at that, partnership opportunity, as, the retailers, can be the conduit, to the consumer, doing it in a privacy, first way, that can create a ton of value, for brands. And then all of a sudden they can start acting like D2Cs and, and the ability to reach customers and to interact, without having all the baggage of all the PII, nor the low conversion rates of a typical D2C. So it's really, the thesis that I think everybody was pushing on the D2Cs, a decade ago, is coming true, via, retail media, just in a different way. And especially sort of done in a way that is privacy first, executed via clean rooms.
And a follow-up to that, Patrick, assortment seems to be another power lever that brands have in the era of marketplaces. What are your thoughts around that?
So like, it's restraint. It's strength via restraint. And so, and choicefulness. And so so to me, like, I think Apple does, a phenomenal job here. And so they have an exclusive SKU at Walmart, that's $100 less, for a MacBook Air. It's an older version. You can't get anywhere else. And so that then preserves the brand, integrity, on Apple.com, but now they can reach a whole new customer that they weren't able to before. Or they'll do things like, hey, if you want your, you want your iPhone engraved or your AirTags engraved, or your AirPods, engraved, you have to get it through Apple. Like, you can't get it through Amazon. But at the same time, they say, hey, how do I reach net new customers? Well, I'm going to do a big promo, during Prime Day, on accessories, and that thing is going to take off. And to me, like, if I step back, and I look back to, 5-6 years ago, Apple previously did not have much of a relationship with Amazon, and they leaned into that relationship. And they later leaned into the relationship with Walmart. And Apple is now Amazon's largest vendor. And Nike said, hey, we're going to go build out a D2C. And over those past 5 years, Apple's stock is 5x, Nike's is down 5%. And now all of a sudden, Nike is talking about, pulling back, on their D2C ambitions and going back to retailers. I think if we look at those, it's clear, what was the right strategy. And I think sort of, and it's not like, previously people thought D2C was an existential position. It's not. It's a class of trade. And so, for brands, they have to embrace it and figure out, like, why does the D2C exist? How does it help customers? And then use that, to, help grow their business.
Yeah. And I see a lot of brands being choiceful even about how they engage in the marketplace on a global basis. I see a lot of brands that realize the power of Amazon in North America is irrefutable. And so they'll put their assortment there. But if you go to other markets, say Europe, where Amazon doesn't have as much of a powerful position, they may not want to be on that marketplace. And so there's an association, particularly for premium brands, that Amazon carries with it a legacy and a reputation of being a discount. But I think that's a short-term solution. I think they're at the end they're gonna move on to all the rest of the Amazon marketplaces, just like
and I think marketplaces in countries where brands may not have the same share that they have in the States is a low cost way to get distribution and to understand the customer versus trying to sell hand to hand across brick and mortar, which, oh, by the way, the square footage in every other country less the US is a heck of a lot smaller, and so fighting for that space is that much harder.
Right. And finally, to keep on with the brands and what they need to think of, what sort of investments and choices did they need to make in order to evaluate the right retail media network for them? How are they going to know which ones are best positioned for them to grow profitably?
So right now we're in sort of like the rabbit phase of retail media. And they're like multiplying every time you turn around. They're like, there's another one, and you don't want to say to like somebody that like their baby's ugly, but there are a lot of ugly babies here. And so for brands, like for me, it's like I want to focus on scale and I want to focus on O&O first. A regional convenience store that spins up a partnership with some DSP has neither scale nor unique inventory nor sustainable gross margins. I don't care. And so, helping brands see through sort of all the noise and sort of what actually, can help their shareholders create value is absolutely key. And making choiceful bets of like, who are the winners going to be, 5 years from now, and doubling down there. And, I just, I think it's a myth that there's going to be a gazillion winners here. There's going to be a handful. And I think brands, need to focus on, who has the scale, who has the unique inventory, who has the insights, and ultimately who has the performance to justify brand investment, and partnering, with these platforms going forward.
Thank you, Patrick. We'd love some audience feedback for today's episode. The best way to make that happen, if you're using Apple or Spotify as your listening platform, please leave us a rating and a review there. And as Jacqui said earlier, or maybe I said it, number 5, that's her favorite number, but you can give us whatever rating you think is appropriate. We're going to include a link to the new Flywheel white paper, The Big Shift, that Patrick and his colleague Katie Box co-authored. It'll be in the digital liner notes of this episode, so please go there and look for it. Patrick, thanks for taking time out of your day as you were heading on vacation to join us and educate us on the new balance of power between brands and retailers. Really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks so much, Peter. Thanks, Jacqui. Appreciate it.
Our pleasure.
Yep. Jacqui, would love to hear from you. One or two of your poignant thoughts from what Patrick shared today that really resonated with you.
Thoughts, Peter? The theme, starting from you going to Patrick and running through, is collaboration, working, the economic buyers and sellers, for them to succeed, they have to play nicely together. And that is basically what both parties need to pay attention to. And other bon mots have been that Patrick loves a fractal dinosaur t-shirt for his toddler.
I'm glad we got that. I know that all I know is that the soundbite from today's episode will involve ugly babies. That's all I'm going to say.
I'm just really proud of myself that I didn't cuss. So,
All right, Jacqui, as always, thanks again for stepping in to co-host for Shri. I know he appreciates, I certainly do. To our audience, thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you found this educational and entertaining. We look forward to you joining us on the next episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Goodbye. The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPG Guys LLC or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPG Guys LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPG Guys LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPG Guys LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.